Ian.
Yes, sir.
So there's a modern game we're going to talk about that there's some controversy because there's no controversy, which I think is strange. Far Cry 5, which is a open world first person shooter type of game based upon the other Far Cries, which I remember the first Far Cry coming out and being like, this is the game that you need a whole new rig to play this game. Remember when that came out? That was like the big thing about it.
No, that was Crysis. Crysis is the one that was always talked about.
Originally Far Cry before that. You don't remember that way back?
It was Crysis is the one that everyone jokes about needing. That still to this day, there's jokes about Crysis.
Far Cry was the original one, going back to like the early 2000s, I believe. That was the one, Ian.
Okay,
remember because they had like the water. You walk in on the beach. Am I making this up? Why do you gotta be contrary to me all the time for the first topic?
Maybe that's right, but Crysis is the one that I remember everyone saying you needed like an insane rig.
So I remember Far Cry being the one that you needed at the time, a better rig. Anyway, Ian, we're here at 4 later at Far Cry 5. So Far Cry 5 takes place, Middle America, and it's based around some weird cult family.
Some family in the fake town of Hope, Montana.
Okay.
Or something like that.
Eden's Gate.
They're
cultists.
Right.
So I guess what people have a problem with is
Hope County, Montana.
I guess what people have a problem with is that in the lore of this game, they are not overtly like white nationalists, I guess. They are not overtly racist. And so there's not like an overt, is it considered to be avert, but there's no real metaphor for the current political climate that people can easily pick out and say, oh, this is talking about what's going on today in the U.S.
I think the larger problem is that you don't even need that, but if you're going to take something with, I think it said it's toothless in all regards. I would agree in some way if this is all to be taken as at face value. When you announce a game that's based on a cult, or is going to have a cult as an enemy, you don't have to make it white nationalist. You don't have to make it racist. But you should probably at least try to look at... You should at least take the subject matter of the cult seriously. And I think, at least in this article, and this is where I would agree with the situation, you should at least try to handle the idea of the cult seriously and
not make it a joke.
And what it is they never really approach it from an angle that can be taken seriously. They don't talk about, how a cult would actually recruit members or anything like that. Okay. It's all done with wild, wacky drugs, mind control, and hypnosis and stuff.
So stuff that hasn't existed since like the cults in the 70s or even 80s.
Well, no,
they're not looking at the modern context where if they really wanted to say, okay, maybe they would have been about, I hate to bring up the fake news, but stuff like that to recruit people, or propagandists, more overt to what we see.
It's not
today.
Using real ways that it's not attacking real ways that cults work. It's using the idea of a cult to be sensationalist, to bring people in, but it's not actually dealing with the actual issue of cults. It's like, here's a cult, it uses this as advertising, gets everyone interested in the premise, and then instead of dealing with it as an actual cult, it's, oh, we've got some, wacky fake drug that's, oh, this is why the cultists are acting the way they do.
Ben Kuchera at Polygon writes that Far Cry 5 gestures towards serious issues like religious extremism or gun culture, but gets nervous and pulls its punches, stopping short of being either entertainingly apolitical or seriously timely. That's interesting. I guess they wanted to walk this line not to offend anyone ever.
Right.
And in doing so, it's like, well, what do you have left then? Here, you just have this background and landscape of all this politically charged stuff, in theory, but it's not politically charged anymore.
Right,
it's just there.
There's nothing there.
It's like setting a game during antebellum South, let's just say, but not
touching
slavery at all somehow. But
exactly.
You're in the South,
right?
And you're like a trader, just like making your way or farming, but you somehow skirt around racism and slavery somehow.
We're not going to tackle any of the uncomfortable issues,
even though we're setting ourselves in that garden.
Yeah,
that's almost harder to do. I think it's harder to do that.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, to what end? I don't think. To me, that's That's toothless, and I have no real need for that.
This Verge article says, intentionally or not, Far Cry 5 doesn't feel like a failed attempt to explore far-right separatism. It feels like a game that started out loosely based on then contemporary politics and right-wing splinter groups, got derailed by the real world's hard, sudden turn into political catastrophe, and ended up as a mess of topical buzzwords. So maybe when it was starting up, they're like, oh, okay, we can explore these issues. But, whoa, wow, some of these issues are actually coming to the forefront now. Whoa, we got to now back away from this shit. You know, like the fact that prior to last year, the last couple of years, neo-Confederate wasn't really a word you heard. And now it is again, where it's like, wow, you have a bunch of these people coming out of the woodworks. So maybe that was it. Like, we want to just stay as far away as we can from this stuff.
I don't know. I mean, I almost find that to be
unfortunate, or they're just, I mean, this is a huge game. They have a lot of money behind it, years of development cycle. You know, you can't piss off a large chunk of the population, you know, if you want your game to be successful necessarily. But then again, at the end of the day, maybe that would have drawn people to play it. Because now I mean, not that I'm drawing a game for this to begin with, but if I'm not going to play a single player campaign where it's just like, oh, this is just, you know, a fun time in this weird environment. Because when you look at it, why don't you just play, when you play a GTA game, it's a fun environment to begin with because the city, but then they build in some of these themes here and there and they piece it together.
Sure.
So that's more effective. This is, if you're couched in all of this stuff, that's politically charged, but then when you actually play it, it's not. That to me is it's there's some sort of dissonance there. There has to be.
For me, it's how they sold it. You can do a cult story and then have it go off the rails and be wacky and whatever you want. It's just, that's not really how that was pitched. And it seems like at one point they probably wanted to go all in and gung-ho on the idea, and I think they got cold feet. What's strange to me is, had this game been announced maybe 10 or 15 years ago, they probably would have had no problem going all in on this.
Sure.
On this idea. But now everything is so delicate that I feel like they had to tiptoe around it to make sure that, you know, they could sell it to, well, as many as they could with no offense.
This is interesting in this Verge article. The group that bears the most resemblance to a conservative militia in Far Cry 5 isn't the Eden's Gate cult. It's the resistance movement that players create to fight the cult in fictional Hope County, Montana, a town already full of gun enthusiasts and members of existing militias. As you proceed through the game, blowing things up to raise your resistance meter, that's kind of strange, cult leaders will periodically accuse you of being too violent, evoking the standard first-person shooter, both sides are bad trope. Is that a trope in first-person shooters that both sides are bad? I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
But the cult is so ridiculously monstrous that it's obvious hypocrisy. When a resistance member impliedly tortures a cultist at one point, it's played as a quirky, offhand detail, while the cult engages in over-the-top monstrosity like making children eat their own parents. Whoa, okay. Okay. It says there are on the nose references in the game to current political stuff, but it just seems like it's like the Trump P tape. There's one side quest you get. I think it's funny as hell.
I heard about that. Like you have to you have to retrieve a tape or something like that.
So maybe maybe this was a case of just bad timing with their game, where it started at one point and then it ended somewhere else, and then it's like, okay, we have to just.
Yeah, I mean that's what I just said. Like if this was 10 years ago or 5 years ago, I have a feeling this would have come out probably with a. Probably closer to the vision I think everyone kind of assumed where it was going, and maybe they just said, you know what, maybe this wasn't the right time for it and we just need to get this out.
Is there an obligation from a major studio to do something politically charged if it's leaning that way already?
An obligation? No, there's no obligation from a major studio to do that, but I think I think at some point, if people want, at some point, I think there's a market for games that do tackle stories in a more serious way. You know,
but Far Cry was never ultra serious though.
Doesn't mean you can't do it. I'm not saying I'm not saying it has to be. I'm just saying that personally, it doesn't appeal to me in that way. And I have
it would appeal to you more if it was more metaphor, a bigger metaphor or closer metaphor with current political.
I would have read more
Right.
about it.
You would.
I don't know that I ever would have actually played it.
Okay.
But I'm just
But
saying.
at least you would have been more interested.
Yeah, from the
potentially.
outside looking in, this is less interesting to me than what it would have been if it had at least taken a shot at something, good or bad.
But then at the end of the day, you're gonna have a lot of maybe people playing this that won't give a shit about it either way. They just want to play multiplayer and kill people and do stuff. And
Is there multiplayer in Far Cry?
is there multiplayer in Far Cry?
I have no idea. I thought it was a single player game.
Far Cry multiplayer. Can they make any game anymore without multiplayer?
I'd give the game some credit if
It's co-op.
okay.
That's pretty cool. Oh, that's right, because 4 was co-op as well. 4 took place with like elephants and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And like some weird tropical paradise. All right. So all right. Well, I've seen some people complaining one way or the other about, oh, it's not political enough, or why are people complaining it's not political enough? It is what it is. We move on with our lives, I guess.
I don't care. It's not so much it's not political enough or it's too political. It's just when you announce a game
Like
that forward on it, that up front with it, that kind of trailer and that kind of picture, when that's how you announce the game, based on that sort of story and not on some sort of gameplay mechanic or something like that, but you're like, here's the next one, here's a cult sitting around a table with a bunch of guns, and then you deliver the story with no teeth. I think that's more why people are upset, because you present it as it's going to be one thing and it's another.